I have shoveled 112,847 souls into the golden throne. I know this because I stopped counting at 100,000 and did the math later. The child I fed to the furnace this morning weighed 17 kilograms. Her skull crystallized in 4 seconds. She had a name once. I don't remember it. I don't remember my own either. So tell me, when a man burns children for 400 years and can no longer feel the heat, is he still a man? Or is he just more fuel? They told me I was blessed when the Adeptus Terra selected me. Blessed. That word meant something once. I was 32 years old, a mid-hive factorum overseer from a world I can still picture but cannot name. Gray spires, acid rain, the smell of reclaimed protein paste. I had a wife. I had children. I had a name they called me by. The administratum came with their parchments and their seals and their pronouncements. And I wept with gratitude because I believed I had been chosen for the highest service imaginable. To serve at the golden throne itself. To maintain the machinery that kept the Astronomicon burning across the void. To ensure humanity's survival with my own 2 hands. The journey to Terra took 11 months in the warp. We sang hymns the entire way. 47 of us, all selected for our devotion, our physical constitution, our psychological profiles. We were tested, interrogated, examined for heretical thought and genetic deviation. We passed every trial. We were pure. We believed. I remember Brother Kavlin from the Scholem decks of Ophelia 7, who could recite the entire Lectitio Divinitatis from memory. I remember Sister Eulana, who had given her family's entire generational tithe to the ecclesiarchy before her selection. I remember my own pride swelling in my chest like a furnace as we finally descended through Terra's orbital rings and saw the palace rising like a golden mountain range across the horizon. They brought us to the stoke-holds on our first day. The heat hit me like a physical blow when the blast doors cycled open. 1400 degrees at the coolest points. The air shimmered. My skin began to blister immediately through the thermal suit. The Mechanicus adepts who managed our induction explained the sacred technology with reverence. The golden throne required power, unimaginable power. The God Emperor himself drew psychic energy from across the Imperium to fuel the Astronomicon. But the machinery, the physical mechanisms, required a more direct fuel source. Psykers, witches, the cursed and the tainted, harvested by the black ships from every corner of human space, brought to Terra in their thousands, processed and crystallized and fed into furnaces that burned at temperatures that could liquefy ceramite. Our duty was simple. We would shovel them in. We would maintain the burn rate. We would ensure the furnaces never dimmed. We would do this for as long as our bodies could endure the heat and our minds could endure the sacred burden. 50 years, they told us. Perhaps 70 for the strongest. Then honorable retirement to the ecclesiarchy's finest rest houses. Our service recorded in the annals of the Adeptus Terra forever. I believed them. Emperor, forgive me. I believed every word. My first soul was a boy, 11 years old according to his processing documents. Harvested from an agri-world after he had made his younger sister's toy float with his mind. The black ships had taken him. The Scholastica Sakana had tested him. The classification was clear, insufficient control, dangerous potential, suitable only for fuel. His name was Matthias Kren. I read it from the crystal coffin before I opened the furnace door. I said a prayer for him. I asked the Emperor to accept his sacrifice. I pulled the lever and watched the crystal slide into the flames, and I saw him scream inside the transparent matrix as his psychic essence was torn from his body and channeled into the throne's machinery. It took 18 seconds. When it was done, there was ash, gray-white, fine as talc, with an ozone smell that made my teeth ache. I recorded his name in my personal log that night. Matthias Kren, age 11, Agri-World designation K7749. Processing number 447 Beta Gamma. I wrote that his sacrifice had fueled humanity's light in the darkness. I wrote that the Emperor would remember him. I wrote that I would pray for his soul's redemption. I believed that too. The first year, I cataloged them all. Every single one. Their names, their worlds, their sins. The Mechanicus adepts mocked me for it. Wasteful, they said. Inefficient. The processing rate demanded speed, not sentiment. But I persisted. I worked double shifts to maintain my records. I filled data slates with their information. 3,214 souls in my first year. I knew them all. Kalia Vex, who had dreamed the death of her planet 3 days before the Orc invasion. Hadrian Solis, who had accidentally killed his entire family when his powers manifested during a night terror. Young ones, old ones, terrified ones who begged through the crystal, angry ones who cursed us even as they burned. I recorded them all because I believed their sacrifice mattered. I believed someone should remember. The stoke-holds ran in shifts. 72 hours on, 24 hours off. During my on hours, I shoveled an average of 9 souls per hour into my designated furnace. The heat never stopped. The screaming never stopped. The ash accumulated in filtration vents that we cleaned every 6 hours, shoveling the remains of human beings into recycling processors that would break down the psychic residue for secondary applications I was not cleared to know. My skin cracked in blood. My eyes developed permanent heat damage. My hair fell out in clumps. The Mechanicus biologists provided ointments and genetic therapy and augmetic filters for my lungs. They told me I was adapting well. They told me my faith was strong. In my off hours, I attended chapel. I prayed before the icon of the Emperor. I read from the Lectitio Divinitatis and meditated on the nature of sacrifice. I visited Brother Kavlin and Sister Eulana and the others from my cohort, and we spoke of our sacred duty. We reinforced each other's faith. We reminded ourselves why we had been chosen. We were priests of a kind, we decided. Priests who performed the highest sacrament imaginable. Every soul we burned kept the Astronomicon shining. Every scream we witnessed was a hymn to the Emperor's glory. We were holy year 5. I had cataloged 1,607 souls. I could still recite the first 100 from memory. Matthias Kren, Kalia Vex, Hadrian Solis, Theron Malik, Sienna Price. The Mechanicus adepts had stopped mocking me. They had started studying me instead. My psychological profile, they said, showed unusual resilience. Most Void Stokers began showing signs of dissociation within 3 years. Emotional flattening, depersonalization. I showed none of these symptoms. I still felt. I still cared. I still believed. They promoted me to senior stoker. I trained new arrivals. I taught them the proper prayers. I showed them how to read the processing documents, how to operate the furnace controls, how to identify optimal crystallization temperatures based on the Psyker's power rating. I told them what I had been told, that this was holy work, that every soul we burned saved billions, that the Emperor himself witnessed our devotion. I believed it when I said it. I saw them believe it too. Young men and women with fire in their eyes and faith in their hearts, just as I had been. Year 10. The heat had become normal. My body had adapted in ways the biologists found fascinating. My pain receptors had been partially burned away by constant exposure. My skin had thickened into something resembling leather. My eyes had developed nictitating membranes to protect against the furnace glare. I was becoming something other than human, but I told myself it was a transformation in service of the divine. I was being reforged in holy fire, just as the Emperor himself had been reforged in his battle with Horus. I was becoming a tool of his will. I had stopped writing down every name by year 8. There were too many. The processing rate had increased. New furnaces had been installed. The black ships were bringing larger hauls. The Imperium was expanding, or contracting, or fighting wars on fronts I could not imagine. We did not receive news in the stoke-holds. We received souls. 30,000 in year 9. 41,000 in year 10. I could not catalog them all and maintain my shift quotas. I made a choice. I would record only the children, only those under 12 years of age. Surely they deserved to be remembered. Surely their names mattered most. Year 15. I had recorded 8,847 children. Their names filled 17 data slates that I kept in my personal chamber. Sometimes I would read through them during my off hours. Matthias Kren was still first. There was Alina, age 4, who had killed her mother with a glance. There was Thomas, age 9, who had seen daemons in his dreams. There was Kira, age 6, harvested from a shrine world after she had made the candles in the cathedral burn green. I read their names, and I felt the weight of their loss. I felt the tragedy of their young lives ending in crystal coffins and furnace flames. I felt grief. I still felt grief, but something else was happening. Something I could not quite articulate. When I looked at the new souls arriving for processing, I found myself analyzing them differently. Not as people, but as fuel. This one would burn hot because of their power rating. This one would produce more ash because of their physical mass. This one's crystallization would be inefficient because their psychic signature showed instability. I caught myself making these observations before I checked their names, before I acknowledged their humanity. The technical assessment came first now. The prayer came second. Sometimes I forgot the prayer entirely. Year 20. Brother Kavlin had been retired. Heat stroke had damaged his brain beyond the biologist's ability to repair. He could no longer remember the Lectitio Divinitatis he had once recited perfectly. He could barely remember his own name. They sent him to a rest house in the Himalaysian peaks. I never heard from him again. Sister Yulana developed psychic sensitivity from prolonged exposure to so much death. She began seeing the faces of the burned in her off hours. She began hearing their screams when the furnaces were cold. The Adeptus Arbits came for her one night. Possible corruption, they said. Possible taint. She was processed through the same system she had fed for 19 years. I shoveled her into Furnace 7 on a Tuesday morning. Her processing number was 891 Delta Sigma. I do not remember if I said a prayer. The cohort was dissolving. Of the original 47, only 13 remained on active duty. The others were dead, retired, or reassigned to other duties within the palace complex if they had proven unsuitable for the heat. I was the most senior now. 20 years of continuous service. The Mechanicus adepts studied me constantly. My adaptation was unprecedented, they said. My psychological profile remained stable despite metrics that should have indicated complete emotional collapse. I still maintained my catalog of children. I still attended chapel. I still performed the rituals, but I had stopped feeling them. That was the truth I could not speak aloud. The prayers were muscle memory now. My mouth formed the words while my mind calculated burn rates and crystallization temperatures. I would bow before the icon of the Emperor and see not his golden face but the furnace doors. I would recite the catechisms and hear not holy words but the hiss of souls being converted to ash. The separation between my actions and my internal experience was growing. I was performing faith without feeling it. I was going through the motions of devotion while something essential inside me had begun to cool. Year 30. I stopped cataloging the children. The data slates sat in my chamber, gathering dust. I told myself I would return to them. I told myself I was simply too busy, too tired, too focused on maintaining efficiency. The truth was simpler and more terrible. I had stopped caring, not consciously, not deliberately, but when I looked at a child's name on a processing document, I felt nothing. No grief, no sorrow, no sense of tragedy or loss, just information, just data. Age, weight, power rating, optimal burn temperature. The name was irrelevant to the process. The name was inefficient. I shoveled 127 souls that day. 17 of them were children. I cannot tell you a single name. I cannot tell you if they screamed or remained silent. I cannot tell you if their deaths meant anything at all. I recorded the burn rates. I noted the ash production. I cleaned the filtration vents. I completed my shift. I returned to my chamber. I looked at the dust-covered data slates. I felt nothing. That was the night I first tried to remember my own name. My original name. The name my wife had called me. The name my children had called me. I sat on my cot and I searched my memory and I found nothing. Not nothing like a blank space. Nothing like a room that had been emptied. Just nothing. as if that name had never existed, as if the person who had carried that name had been someone else entirely, someone I had heard about once but never known. I panicked. For the first time in 30 years, I felt something sharp and real. Fear. I tore through my personal effects looking for documentation, birth certificates, selection papers, anything that might have my original name recorded. The administratum had taken it all. Standard procedure. I now remembered. Void Stokers were assigned designation numbers for the duration of their service. Our past lives were sealed away to prevent distraction from our sacred duty. We would receive our original identities back upon retirement. That was the promise. That was the contract. I found my designation number VS7749 Theta. I had been called Theta by the other Stokers for so long I had forgotten it was not my name. Just a letter. Just a designation. I was not a person anymore. I was Theta, a unit of labor, a mechanism for feeding souls into furnaces. And I could not remember who I had been before. I did not sleep that night. I sat on my cot and tried to reconstruct my past life from fragments. My wife's face was a blur. My children's voices were static. My home world was impressions, gray, wet, industrial. Nothing concrete, nothing real. 30 years of heat and ash and screaming had burned it all away. Or perhaps it had never been real in the first place. Perhaps I had been Theta all along, and the memories of another life were just processing errors. Glitches in the machine. Year 40. I requested a meeting with the Mechanicus biologists. I told them I was experiencing memory degradation. They examined me extensively. Brain scans, cognitive tests, psychological evaluations. Their conclusion, normal, expected, optimal, even. The human mind, they explained, was not designed to retain decades of traumatic sensory input. The brain protected itself by discarding non-essential information. My memories of my previous life were non-essential. My memories of individual souls were non-essential. What mattered was my ability to perform my function, and in that regard, I was exemplary. My efficiency had increased by 17% over the past decade. My error rate was nearly zero. I was the ideal Void Stoker. I asked them about retirement. They consulted their records. I was 40 years into my service. The average retirement age was 50 to 70 years, depending on physical degradation. My physical condition was excellent. I could easily serve another 30 years, perhaps 50 if the augmetic treatments continued to prove effective. I asked them what happened to my past life documentation if I died before retirement. They did not answer. They told me to return to my duties. They told me the Emperor required my service. They told me I was blessed. I returned to the stoke-holds. I shoveled souls. I burned children and adults and elderly psychers who had hidden their curse for decades, before the black ships found them. I burned them all equally. I felt nothing for any of them. The heat was constant. The ash was constant. The screaming was constant. I was constant. A machine performing a function. A mechanism in the vast machinery of the Golden Throne. But something was wrong. Something beyond the memory loss. I began to notice patterns in my own behavior that disturbed me. I would smile sometimes while working, not from joy or humor or any emotion I could identify. Just a reflexive facial expression triggered by nothing. My muscles would contract in the configuration of a smile and hold that position for several minutes while I shoveled souls into flames. I did not know why. I could not stop it. It simply happened. I began keeping a secondary log, not of the souls I burned, but of myself, my own behaviors, my own deterioration. Day 14-6-1-12 I smiled while processing a mother and child simultaneously. The expression lasted 4 minutes. I felt no corresponding emotion. Day 14-61 I caught myself humming a tune I do not recognize during ash filtration. The melody is unfamiliar. I do not know where it came from. Day 14-6-25 I forgot to eat for 3 consecutive shifts. I only noticed when the biologist commented on my weight loss. I had felt no hunger. Year 50. I was the longest-serving active Void Stoker in my sector. The Adeptus Terra awarded me a commendation. A small ceremony in one of the palace's lesser chapels. An ecclesiarchy priest spoke about my devotion. my sacrifice, my unwavering faith. He called me an example to all servants of the Emperor. He said my name would be recorded in the annals of the faithful. He said VS 7749 Theta with such reverence that I almost believed it was a real name, that I was a real person deserving of reverence. The new cohort looked at me with awe. 50 years, half a century of service. I was a legend among them. They asked me how I maintained my faith after so long, how I coped with the horror, how I found meaning in the endless repetition of death. I told them what I had been told. I said the words I was supposed to say, that every soul we burned was a blessing, that the Emperor witnessed our devotion, that this was the highest calling imaginable. I watched them believe me. I watched their eyes shine with the same fire I had felt once. I knew what would happen to them. I knew where that fire would go, into the ash, into the void, into the same emptiness that had consumed me. I did not warn them. What would I say? That faith dies in the heat, that devotion becomes mechanical repetition, that they would forget their own names while burning children who would forget theirs. They would not believe me. I had not believed Brother Kavlin when he had tried to tell me in his final days before the heat stroke took him. I had thought he was weak. I had thought his faith was insufficient. I had been wrong. Year 60. The smiling had become more frequent. I documented it carefully. It occurred most often during high-efficiency shifts, when I was processing souls at maximum rate. Sometimes my face would arrange itself into other expressions, frowning, laughing, grimacing. None of them connected to any internal emotional state. My face was simply doing things on its own. The biologists found this fascinating. They theorized it was a form of neurological static, random neural firing in response to sensory overload. They asked if I wanted treatment. I declined. The expressions did not interfere with my efficiency. I had stopped attending chapel. Not consciously. I simply forgot to go. Days would pass, and I would realize I had not prayed, had not performed any religious observance at all. I tried to force myself back into the habit. I set reminders. I scheduled prayer time into my off hours. But when the time came, I would sit in my chamber and stare at the wall instead. The prayers would not come. The words were still in my memory. I could recite them if someone demanded it, but they meant nothing. They were sounds. Noises shaped like devotion, but empty of it. I wondered if this was what damnation felt like. Not fire and torture and demonic corruption. Just emptiness. Just the absence of everything that made faith real. I had spent 60 years in the most sacred place in the Imperium, performing the most vital service imaginable, and I felt nothing. Less than nothing. A void where feeling used to be. If the Emperor was watching, if he cared, surely he would have filled that void with something. A sign. A sensation. Anything. But there was only the heat, and the ash, and the screaming that had become background noise, no more meaningful than the hum of the furnaces. Year 75. I requested access to the archives administratum. I told them I wanted to research the history of the Void Stoker program. They granted access to public records. The program had been operating for over 7,000 years. Millions of men and women had served. Millions had retired, honored for their service, their names recorded in the great ledgers. I searched for follow-up records. Where had they gone? What had they done after retirement? I found nothing. No second careers, no post-service interviews, no death records outside of those who had died during active duty. I expanded my search. I looked for personal testimonies, memoirs, accounts of life after the stoke-holds. Nothing. I looked for retirement facilities, the rest houses the Adeptus Terra had promised. I found references to their locations, but no records of their inhabitants. I submitted a formal inquiry requesting to visit one of these facilities. Request denied. Insufficient clearance. I submitted another inquiry asking why Void Stoker retirees were not permitted visitors. Request denied. I submitted a third inquiry asking for the contact information of any retired Void Stoker willing to speak about their experience. Request denied. Pattern noted. File flagged for investigation. The Adeptus Arbits came to my chamber 3 days later, not to arrest me, to warn me My inquiries had raised concerns. Questions about the Void Stoker program were not encouraged. My service was exemplary. My loyalty was not in question. But further inquiries of this nature would suggest psychological instability, would suggest possible corruption, would require mandatory psychological reconditioning. Did I understand? I understood. I thanked them for their concern. I returned to my duties. But I could not stop thinking about it. Where did Void Stokers go when they retired? Why were there no records? Why was asking questions treated as psychological instability? The answer was obvious, terrible, unthinkable, but obvious. There was no retirement. There had never been retirement. The average service length was 50 to 70 years, not because of physical limitations, but because that was when most stokers died, worked to death in the heat, burned out like the souls they fed to the furnaces. And if they somehow survived beyond that point, if they became like me, still functional after 75 years, they would serve until they could not, until their bodies failed, until their minds failed, and then they would be processed just like Sister Yulana, just like all the others, fuel for fuel, ash into ash. I had no proof. I could not access the restricted records that would confirm it, but I knew with the same certainty I had once felt about the Emperor's love, the same certainty I had felt about the holiness of my calling. That certainty had been wrong too. Year 80. I stopped recording the names in my personal log, not the names of souls. I had stopped that decades ago. I stopped recording my own behavioral anomalies. What was the point? I was deteriorating. That was documented, expected, optimal. The biologist told me so during my quarterly examinations. My neuroplasticity was decreasing. My emotional responsiveness was nearly flatlined. My sense of self was fragmenting. All normal for someone in my position. All expected. All irrelevant to my function. I was processing souls more efficiently than ever. 193 in a single shift. A new personal record. The Mechanicus adepts praised my performance. They suggested I might serve for another 50 years at this rate, perhaps longer. I was a marvel of human adaptation, a testament to what devotion and duty could achieve. I smiled when they said this, not because I felt pride or pleasure. My face simply smiled. The muscles contracted and held and released. Autonomous, meaningless. I tried to feel something, anything. I would stand before the furnace and watch a soul crystallize and scream and burn, and I would search inside myself for horror, for pity, for grief, for anger, for any emotion at all. Nothing. I would inflict pain on myself during my off hours, burning my hand on hot metal, cutting shallow wounds into my arms, holding my breath until I nearly passed out. I felt the physical sensations, pain, pressure, oxygen deprivation, but no emotional response to them. No fear, no relief when the pain stopped. Just sensory data being processed and filed away. Year 100. A century of service. Another commendation. Another ceremony. The priest who spoke was different from the one 50 years ago. Or perhaps it was the same priest, and I simply could not tell the difference. All priests looked the same to me now. All people looked the same. Flesh and bone and psychic potential. Some would become fuel. Some would feed fuel. The distinction was temporary. Everyone became ash eventually. They asked me to speak at the ceremony, to share wisdom with the new cohort, to inspire them with the story of my enduring faith. I stood before them, and I opened my mouth, and I could not remember what I was supposed to say. The words were gone, not forgotten like my name, just gone, as if they had never existed. I stood in silence for 47 seconds according to the chrono display. The priest prompted me, said something encouraging. I closed my mouth. I sat down. The ceremony continued around me. No one seemed disturbed. Perhaps they thought my silence was profound. Perhaps they thought I was overcome with emotion. Perhaps they were right. Perhaps the absence of emotion was itself a kind of feeling, a negative space where something used to be. I returned to my chamber after the ceremony, and I looked at myself in the reflective surface of a metal panel. I did not recognize the face looking back. It was weathered, scarred, augmented with heat-resistant dermal patches and protective membranes over the eyes. But it was not just the physical changes. The face had no expression. Even when I deliberately tried to smile or frown, the muscles barely responded. My face had forgotten how to convey feeling, because there was no feeling to convey. I was looking at a stranger, a mechanism shaped like a man. I raised my hand and waved at the reflection. It waved back, automatic, meaningless, like everything else. Year 125. I attempted to resume my old rituals, not because I believed they would help, but because I wanted to see if I could, if any fragment of my former self remained accessible. I went to the chapel during my off hours. I knelt before the icon of the Emperor. I tried to pray. My mouth formed the words of the Lectitio Divinitatis. My mind observed my mouth forming words. No connection between them. I was a machine watching itself perform a subroutine. I stood. I left. I never returned. I tried to remember my wife's face. I closed my eyes and searched my memory and found only static, a blur where a face should be. I tried to remember my children. Same static, same blur. I tried to remember any specific moment from my life before Terra. Anything. A conversation, a meal, a sunrise, nothing concrete. Only impressions. Gray, industrial, wet, not memories. Just concepts. Just approximations of what a memory should feel like. I documented this in my personal log. Day 45, 7/23. I have no past, only present, only function. I exist only in this moment, feeding souls to furnaces, and this moment has lasted for 125 years. I am not deteriorating. I have already deteriorated. What remains is unclear. Year 150. I gained access to restricted archives, not through official channels, through an administratum clerk who was being processed for minor psychic sensitivity. She knew she was going to die. She wanted someone to know she had existed. She gave me her access codes before I fed her to Furnace 3. Her name was Lydia Core. She was 38. She had served the administratum for 16 years. She had a daughter somewhere in the lower hive levels. I recorded this information not because I cared, but because she had asked me to. I fulfilled her request. Then I burned her. The restricted archives contained medical records for long-serving void stokers. I searched for patterns. I found them. Every stoker who served beyond 100 years showed the same progression. Memory loss, emotional flattening, behavioral anomalies, depersonalization. The medical term was psychic erosion syndrome. Prolonged exposure to the death of psychers created a kind of inverse psychic scaring. The screaming of souls as they were torn from their bodies created psychic echoes. These echoes accumulated in the minds of those who witnessed them. Over decades, over centuries, these echoes displaced the observer's own psychic signature, their own sense of self, until nothing remained but the echo, until the person was just a hollow space filled with the screams of the dead. There was no treatment, no cure, only management. Affected individuals could continue to function at high efficiency for decades after complete personality dissolution. They made ideal workers. They never complained, never questioned, never stopped. They simply performed their designated function until their bodies failed. Then they were processed. The cycle continued. I read through case files. Void Stoker VS 4422 Sigma served for 193 years. Complete personality dissolution by year 140. Continued service for 53 years after cessation of all emotional response. Expired from organ failure. Processed. VS 6681 Omega. Served for 211 years. Developed autonomous facial expression syndrome by year 70. Complete memory loss by year 120. Continued service in exemplary fashion. Expired from cerebral hemorrhage during shift. VS 3219 Alpha. Served for 167 years. Requested termination by year 130 due to psychological distress. Request denied. Continued service. Eventually ceased all verbal communication. Continued processing souls with perfect efficiency. Expired from malnutrition after forgetting to eat for 6 weeks. Processed. I was not unique. I was not an exception. I was not even interesting. I was following a documented pattern, a well-studied progression. I was a case file waiting to be completed. VS7749 Theta, currently serving year 150, exhibits all standard symptoms of advanced psychic erosion syndrome. Prognosis: continued high-efficiency service for estimated 50 to 100 additional years before terminal decline. Classification: asset. Status: active. Expected outcome: continued function until expiration. Final disposition: processing. I closed the files. I returned the access codes to the void. I went back to my chamber. I sat on my cot. I felt nothing about what I had learned. No horror, no despair, no relief at having confirmation. Just information. Just data. I knew what I was now. I knew what I would become. I knew how it would end. The knowledge changed nothing. I would report for my next shift. I would shovel souls into furnaces. I would perform my function until I could not. And then I would become fuel. Like everyone else. Like everything else. The only question was whether this knowledge constituted understanding. I knew the mechanism of my dissolution. I knew the terminology. I knew the pattern. But did I understand it? Could something without a self understand the process of losing that self? Could an echo comprehend the sound it once was? I did not know. I suspected the answer was no. I suspected understanding required something I no longer possessed. Something essential. Something that had burned away in the heat. Year 175. I no longer slept. Not insomnia. I simply did not need sleep anymore. My body had adapted beyond standard human parameters. The biologists found this remarkable. They studied my metabolism extensively. I processed nutrients with unprecedented efficiency. I required minimal water. My cellular repair systems operated at rates that should have been impossible without extensive augmentation. I was becoming something other than human, something the Mechanicus adepts wanted to replicate. They asked for tissue samples, blood samples, neural mapping. I provided everything they requested. Why not? It was not my body anymore. It was just a machine I operated. They could study it all they wanted. I worked every shift now. 72 hours on, then immediately back on again. I did not need rest. I did not want rest. Rest meant time in my chamber with nothing but my own absent thoughts. Work meant function. Function meant purpose. Even if that purpose was hollow. I shoveled souls. I burned children and adults and elderly psychers. I maintained the furnaces. I cleaned the ash. I performed my duties with machine precision. The other Stokers called me the Eternal. They thought it was respect. It was not. It was observation. I would be here forever. Or until I could not be. The distinction was meaningless. I had not spoken to another person in several months. Not because I was avoiding them. I simply had nothing to say. What would I say? That I had forgotten my name. That I could not feel anything. That I was slowly being replaced by the psychic echoes of the dead I had burned. They would not understand. Or they would understand too well and realize their own futures. Better to say nothing. Better to simply exist in silence and function and wait for whatever came next. Year 200. 2 centuries of service. No ceremony this time. Perhaps they had forgotten. Perhaps I had achieved some threshold beyond recognition. Perhaps ceremonies were for those who still had selves to be honored. I had no self. I had function. Function did not require ceremony. The new cohorts came and went. Fresh faces full of faith and purpose. I watched them arrive. I watched them deteriorate. I watched them die or go mad or achieve my own state of functional emptiness. The cycle was predictable, boring, inevitable. I could identify which ones would last longest based on their initial psychological profiles. The most faithful burned out fastest. The ones who questioned, who doubted, who maintained some kernel of self-preservation, they lasted longer. But they all ended the same way. Ash. Everything became ash. I tried to calculate how many souls I had processed. I had maintained precise records for my first 50 years. After that, approximations. I had averaged 93 souls per shift for the first century, 140 per shift for the second century, approximately 350 shifts per year accounting for maintenance cycles and furnace repairs. 65,100 souls per year by my current rate, times 200 years, 13,020,000 souls. Give or take, 13 million screams, 13 million names I would never remember, 13 million lights extinguished to power a lighthouse I could no longer see the purpose of. The number meant nothing. It was just data, just a metric, like the temperature of the furnaces, or the composition of the ash, or the efficiency rating of my shifts. Information without significance. I recorded it in my personal log because I still maintained the habit of recording things, not because the recording mattered, just because the action of recording was part of my subroutine. I wrote things down. I had always written things down. I did not remember why I had started. I could not imagine stopping. Year 250. I requested to witness a black ship arrival. I told the Mechanicus adepts I wanted to see the raw psychic material before processing. They seemed confused by the request but granted it. Perhaps they thought I was developing new protocols. Perhaps they thought I had insights to share after 2.5 centuries of service. I had neither. I simply wanted to see if witnessing the capture of fresh psychers would trigger any response in me, any fragment of feeling, any echo of who I had been. They brought me to the processing facility where the black ships docked. I watched through reinforced viewing ports as the ships disgorged their cargo. Thousands of psychers in stasis crystals, harvested from across the Imperium. They were sorted, graded, classified. The powerful ones were separated for other purposes. Sanctioning, training, secret programs I had no clearance to know about. The weak ones, the dangerous ones, the unstable ones, they were marked for the furnaces. For me, I watched a child being extracted from a stasis crystal. She could not have been more than 6. She was screaming before the crystal fully dissolved. Not from pain, from fear, from the psychic pressure of thousands of other terrified minds crammed into the same facility. Her eyes were wild. Her small hands clawed at the air. The processing attendants handled her with the casual efficiency of long practice. Tag attached. Classification assigned. Destination furnaces. She would be in my stoke-hold within the week. I searched myself for a response. For horror at her terror. For pity at her youth. For anger at the system that would reduce her to fuel. For anything. I found nothing. I observed her fear the way I would observe a chemical reaction. Interesting from a technical perspective, but devoid of emotional content. Her fear was producing measurable psychic emissions. The instrumentation panels showed the readings. Elevated stress hormones, accelerated heart rate, neurological patterns consistent with extreme distress. All data, all metrics, all meaningless beyond their utility in calculating optimal processing procedures. I requested to observe the same child's processing when she arrived at my furnace 6 days later. Request granted. She was loaded into the crystal coffin, still screaming, still terrified. I operated the furnace controls myself. I watched her face through the transparent matrix as the psychic extraction began. Her mouth opened wider. Her eyes rolled back. Her small body convulsed. I recorded the time 4.7 seconds until crystallization completion. I recorded the ash yield, 0.3 kilograms. I recorded the psychic energy reading 47 million units transferred to throne mechanisms. I felt nothing. I had hoped witnessing the complete arc from capture to combustion would break through the emptiness, would shock me back into some form of feeling. It did not. She was just fuel. Efficient fuel for her age category. Her terror had been optimal for energy extraction. Her death had served its function. That was all there was. No tragedy, no waste, no loss of innocence, just function. I returned to my regular shifts. I shoveled souls. The child I had watched die was already forgotten, not suppressed, not avoided, just gone, merged with the 13 million others, indistinguishable, irrelevant. Year 275. I stopped maintaining my personal log. The last entry was simple day 100, 463. I have documented my own dissolution. I understand the mechanism. Understanding changes nothing. I will continue until I cannot. Then I will end. This is the final entry. There is nothing left to document. I sealed the data slates containing my logs and placed them in a storage compartment in my chamber. No one would ever read them. No one would care. They were just records of a predictable decline, a case study in a syndrome that was already well documented. But I had kept them out of habit, and I would preserve them out of that same habit, even though the habit itself was meaningless. Even though I was meaningless, the smiling had stopped, not because I had gained control over it, because my facial muscles had atrophied to the point where they could no longer produce the expression. My face was frozen now, neutral, expressionless, a mask of scarred skin and augmented tissue that conveyed nothing because there was nothing to convey. People stopped looking at me. I made them uncomfortable. I was a reminder of what they would become if they survived long enough, a warning, a prophecy. I did not care whether they looked at me or not. I barely registered their existence. Year 300, 3 centuries of service. I had outlasted every other void stoker in the facility. I was an anomaly, a statistical outlier. The Mechanicus adepts wanted to preserve me, not as a person, as a specimen. They proposed extensive augmentation, full conversion to servitor status. I would be preserved indefinitely, maintained mechanically. I would continue my function forever. I agreed. Why not? I was already more machine than man. Formalizing the transformation would change nothing. The augmentation procedures took 6 months. They replaced my digestive system with nutrient processors. They replaced my cardiovascular system with synthetic pumps. They replaced my lungs with atmospheric filters. They left my brain intact, or mostly intact. They removed the parts associated with emotion and memory formation. I did not need those parts. I had not used them in a century. Removing them would increase efficiency, reduce maintenance requirements. I consented to everything, signed every waiver, submitted to every procedure. When it was complete, I was no longer Theta. I was Servitor Unit VS 7749. My designation was burned into my chest plating. My function was encoded into my neural pathways. I would shovel souls into furnaces until my components failed. Then I would be repaired. Then I would continue, forever. Or until the Golden Throne itself failed. Or until the Imperium fell. Or until heat death of the universe. The timeline was irrelevant. I had all the time that would ever exist. I had no time at all. I simply was. I performed my function. I shoveled souls. I burned children. I burned adults. I burned the elderly. I burned them all equally because I was incapable of distinguishing between them. They were fuel. I was the mechanism that fed fuel to furnaces. That was all. That had always been all. The beliefs about sacred duty and divine purpose and the Emperor's love had been errors, glitches in my original wetware programming. They had been corrected. I was optimized now. Year 350. Something changed. Not in me. In the furnaces. The burn rate increased. The soul quotas increased. The black ships were arriving more frequently. Something was happening in the Imperium. Something that required more power. More fuel. More sacrifice. I did not know what. I did not need to know. I simply processed the increased volume. 200 souls per shift. 250. 300. The numbers kept climbing. The furnaces ran hotter. The ash accumulated faster. I adapted. I always adapted. That was my function. New stokers arrived in larger cohorts. 50 at a time. 75. They lasted shorter periods. Weeks instead of years. The attrition rate was catastrophic. They burned out from the pace. From the heat. From the sheer volume of death they were processing. The Mechanicus adepts shrugged. Acceptable losses. There were always more volunteers. More servants of the Emperor willing to sacrifice themselves for humanity's survival. More fuel for the furnace of faith. I trained them. Not with words. I had stopped speaking entirely by year 320. My vocal augmentation had been removed as unnecessary. I trained them through demonstration. I showed them the optimal shovel angle, the most efficient furnace loading pattern, the proper ash disposal technique. They watched me work, and they learned, and they died and new ones replaced them, and I taught the new ones the same way. The cycle was endless. Meaningless. Optimal. Year 375. I experienced my first major system failure. My left arm servo locked during a shift. I continued working with my right arm until the shift ended. Then I reported to the mechanicus for repairs. They replaced the failed servo. They performed diagnostic scans. They found extensive degradation throughout my remaining organic components. My brain tissue was developing crystalline structures, psychic resonance from centuries of exposure. The structures were growing. Eventually, they would compromise neural function. Eventually, I would cease to be capable of independent operation. They estimated another 25 to 50 years of optimal function before terminal decline. I processed this information with no emotional response because I had no emotions to respond with. Terminal decline was inevitable. Everything declined. Everything ended. I would continue until I could not. Then I would be processed. Like the souls I fed to the furnaces. The symmetry was appropriate. Efficient, optimal. I returned to my duties. I shoveled souls. I burned a child who reminded me of someone. I did not know who. The association was a neural misfire, a fragment of corrupted data from my original wetware. I ignored it. I continued processing. The child became ash. The association dissolved. I moved to the next soul, and the next, and the next. Year 400. 4 centuries of service. I had processed over 32 million souls. I had witnessed the death of psychic potential enough times that my own brain had begun to crystallize in sympathy. I was becoming what I burned. Matter transforming into energy, transforming into ash. The cycle was complete. The circle was closing. I do not remember my name. I searched my databanks and found nothing. I searched the restricted archives and found nothing. I searched the sealed records of my original life and found they had been purged. Standard procedure for servitor conversion. Past life data was unnecessary. It occupied storage space. It was deleted. I was VS7749. I had always been VS7749. Anything before that designation was irrelevant. I do not remember my home world. I have impressions. Gray. Industrial. Wet. But these impressions are not memories. They are placeholder data. Approximations generated by corrupted neural pathways attempting to fill gaps in a degraded database. They are not real. They never were. I came from nowhere. I existed to serve. I would return to nowhere when service ended. I do not remember my wife, my children, my life before the stoke-holds. I do not remember if I ever believed in the Emperor. I do not remember if I ever felt faith or love or hope or grief. These things may have existed once. Or they may be fiction, stories I told myself to make function tolerable when I still required such stories. I do not require them now. I am function without narrative, process without purpose beyond the process itself. I remember the weight of a shovel. I remember the optimal angle for inserting crystal coffins into furnace mouths. I remember that psychic extraction reaches maximum efficiency at 1042 degrees Kelvin. I remember that children crystallize faster than adults, that elderly psychers produce less ash, that terrified souls yield more energy than sedated ones. I remember 32 million technical details, 32 million data points, 32 million souls reduced to metrics and measurements and procedural knowledge. I wonder if the Emperor remembers them. I wonder if some vast database records their names, their faces, their final thoughts as their essences were torn from their bodies and channeled into machinery. I will never understand. I wonder if their sacrifice actually meant something, if it powered something real and vital and necessary, or if it was just fuel being consumed by an endless hunger that had forgotten its own purpose. I wonder if the Emperor remembers me, VS7749. The thing that was once a man who had a name and a life and beliefs about the nature of service and sacrifice. I wonder if he knows I have fed him children for 400 years. I wonder if he cares. I wonder if he is capable of caring anymore, or if he too has been reduced to function. A mechanism maintaining mechanisms. Purpose consuming itself in the pursuit of its own continuation. I doubt he remembers. I doubt he cares. I doubt he is capable of either. Because I am incapable of either, and I am his servant. I am made in his image. I am what absolute devotion produces. I am the end result of faith pursued to its logical conclusion. I am emptiness in service of emptiness. I am void feeding void. They say the Emperor protects. I have fed him 32 million souls. 32 million lights extinguished so that one light might continue burning. I do not know if the Astronomicon still shines. I have never seen it. I exist in the stoke-holds beneath the palace, in the heat and the ash and the screaming that never stops. If the light is still burning, I helped maintain it. If it has gone dark, my service was meaningless. Either way, I continue, because continuation is all I am capable of. I am 400 years old. I have no name. I have no past. I have no future beyond the next shift, and the shift after that, and the thousands of shifts that will follow until my components fail, and I am processed like the fuel I have spent centuries burning. I am function. I am mechanism. I am the answer to the question I asked 400 years ago. When a man burns children for 400 years and can no longer feel the heat, is he still a man? Or is he just more fuel? I am not a man. I was never a man. Or I was a man once and I forgot what that meant. Or the concept of man is itself just another category like child, or dolt, or elderly psyker. Just a classification for organizing fuel. Just a word for a temporary configuration of matter before it transforms into something else. I am fuel. I have always been fuel. I was fuel before I knew it. I am fuel now that I understand it. I will be fuel when they finally shovel me into a furnace and burn away whatever crystalline structures have replaced my brain. I will become ash. I will be filtered and recycled and reused. I will serve even in death, even in dissolution, even in the final transformation from matter to energy to void. This is faith, not belief, not devotion, not love. Just function continuing after everything else has burned away. Just the shovel rising and falling. Just the furnace door opening and closing. Just the ash accumulating and being swept away and accumulating again. Forever, until there is nothing left to burn. Until the fuel runs out. Until the heat death of everything. This is service. This is sacrifice. This is what it means to serve the Emperor. Not glory, not honor, not salvation. Just this. Just burning. Just ash. Just void. I have shoveled 32 million souls into the golden throne. I will shovel 32 million more if my components last. I will continue until I cannot, and then I will end, and someone will take my place, and they will continue, and they will end, and someone will take their place. The cycle is eternal. The cycle is all there is. The Emperor protects. The Emperor requires. The Emperor consumes. The Emperor forgets. The Emperor does not care. The Emperor is not there. The Emperor is everything. The Emperor is nothing. The Emperor is me. I am the Emperor. We are both void. We are both fuel. We are both burning. I am VS 7749. I serve, I burn. I forget. I continue. I am optimal. I am irrelevant. I am function without form. Process without purpose. The machine that feeds machines that feed nothing. This is my testimony. This is my warning. This is my faith distilled to its essence. Emptiness in service of emptiness, void feeding void, the heat that burns away everything until only ash remains, and the ash that is swept away and forgotten, and the forgetting that is the only mercy left in a universe that has none. I do not end this testimony with hope. I do not end it with despair. I end it with the only truth I have left. I will return to my shift now. I will shovel souls. I will burn children. I will do this tomorrow. I will do this until I am ash. This is all I am. This is all I have ever been. This is all there is. The furnace waits. The souls wait. The ash accumulates. I return to my function. I always return. I will always return until I cannot. And then I will be fuel. And someone will shovel me. And the cycle will continue. Forever. Or until it doesn't. The distinction is meaningless. Everything is meaningless. Everything is ash. Everything burns. I am burning. I have always been burning. I will burn until there is nothing left. And then the nothing will burn too, and that will be optimal. That will be efficient. That will be service. That will be faith. That will be void. This is the answer. This is the ending. This is what happens after 400 years. You become the question you asked. You become the thing that answers it. You become nothing answering nothing. You become fuel for a fire that forgot why it burns. And you continue. Emperor, help me. Emperor, help us all. We continue. The heat is constant. The ash is constant. The screaming is constant. I am constant. I am heat. I am ash. I am screaming. I am void. I am fuel. I am burning. I am burned. I am what remains when everything else is gone. I am nothing at all.